Welcome to Warhammer 40k 8th edition, Battle Report 13, 1850 points, Chaos Demons of Khorne versus Ultramarines, and today we will be playing the chapter-approved Maelstrom of War mission, Targets of Opportunity. Let's take a quick look at the board and where the objectives have been placed. Starting in this corner with this 2 foot by 2 foot section, we have Objective Marker 2 next to this ruin. Next we have this 2 foot by 2 foot section. And Objective Marker 4 is right here next to this crater. And then finally on this side of the board, we have this 2 foot by 2 foot section. And Objective Marker 3 is right here next to this crater. Moving over to the other side of the board, we will start with this 2 foot by 2 foot section. And here we have Objective Marker 5 next to this ruin. Then we have this 2 foot by 2 foot section. And we have Objective Marker 1 right here next to the corner of this building. And then finally we have this 2 foot by 2 foot section with the final objective marker, which is Objective Marker 6, which is right here just on the inside of the wall of this ruin. So now we will roll for which deployment map the armies will be playing on today. And here's the roll, getting a 5, which is Frontline Assault. So on a roll of a 1, 2, or 3, the Chaos Demons of Khorne will begin setting up on the left side, and the Ultramarines will set up on the right. On a 4, 5, or 6, the armies will deploy on the opposite sides. And here's the roll, getting a 1, so the Chaos Demons of Khorne will begin setting up on the left side, and the Ultramarines will begin setting up on the right side. On a 1, 2, or 3, the Chaos Demons of Khorne will begin deploying first. On a 4, 5, or 6, the Ultramarines will begin deploying first. And it's another 1, so the Chaos Demons of Khorne will begin to deploy first. We will be back after the deployment. So the deployment is now finished. The Chaos Demons of Khorne began setting up first, but the Ultramarines finished deploying first, and so the Ultramarines will go first unless the Chaos Demons of Khorne are able to seize the initiative. We will take a look at the Chaos Demons of Khorne deployment first. Starting with the Chaos Demons of Khorne used the stratagem Denizens of the Warp in order to place Scarbrand, the 2 Bloodthirsters of Insensate Rage, and one of the Bloodletter squads in the Warp, so that at the end of any of their movement phases, they can tear their way into reality. And that, of course, because they put 4 units in, 3 of which had a power rating of 9 or more, and 1 which had a power rating of 8 or less, that will have used all 7 of their command points for this game. And then taking a look at the units that were deployed on the field, starting with a squad of Bloodletters. Skull Cannon number 1, which is within 3 inches of the center of Objective Marker 3. The unit of 8 Fleshhounds, partially surrounding the Demon Prince of Khorne in order to make it so that the Ultramarines are unable to target the Demon Prince. The 2nd Skull Cannon, and the final squad of Bloodletters. And then finally, the 3rd Skull Cannon. Over on the Ultramarines deployment, we have the 1st squad of Tactical Marines inside of this ruin, and they are sitting on Objective Marker 6. Then the 1st Storm Raven, with a squad of Centurions and a Chaplain embarked inside. The Warlord, Rabaul Guilliman, and a 2nd squad of Tactical Marines inside of the ruin. And then the 2nd Storm Raven, with the other squad of Centurions and the other Chaplain inside. This Storm Raven has the Chaplain with the Armor Indomitus embarked inside. And then finally, the final squad of Tactical Marines, and they are within 3 inches of the center of Objective Marker 5. And so now the Chaos Demons of Khorne will attempt to seize the initiative, and they are looking for a 6. And they get it. So the Chaos Demons of Khorne will go first. So let's go into Chaos Demons of Khorne, turn 1. So going into the Chaos Demons of Khorne, turn 1, a reminder that the Chaos Demons of Khorne have 0 command points, and the Ultramarines have 9 command points. And the Chaos Demons of Khorne draw Defend Objective 2, score 2 victory points if you control Objective Marker 2 at the end of 2 consecutive turns. Assassinate, score 1 victory point if at least 1 enemy character was destroyed during this turn. If 3 or more enemy characters were destroyed during this turn, score D3 victory points instead. And Defend Objective 6, score 2 victory points if you control Objective Marker 6 at the end of 2 consecutive turns. And Objective Marker 2 is this one right here, near the Chaos Demons of Khorne deployment zone. And Objective Marker 6 is right here inside of this ruin, next to these tactical marines. So going into the movement phase, the Chaos Demons of Khorne will start by having this squad of Bloodletters move 6 inches up the board, and they will also declare an advance. And here's their advance roll, getting an additional 4 inches for 10 inches of total movement. And the Bloodletters will finish their movement here. Next, this Skull Cannon will remain still. Next, these Fleshhounds are going to move 10 inches up the board, and they will also declare an advance. And here's their advance roll, getting an additional 6 inches for 16 inches of total movement. And the Fleshhounds finish their movement here in this formation. They did not move up the full 16 inches, but this way they will be in a better position so that next turn it will be easier for them to charge up the middle. And now the Demon Prince of Khorne is going to move up to 12 inches up the board behind the Fleshhounds. And the Demon Prince of Khorne will finish its movement here. This Skull Cannon will remain still. This squad of Bloodletters is going to move up the board 6 inches, and they will also declare an advance. And here's their advance roll, getting an additional 4 inches for 10 inches of total movement. And they will finish their movement right here. And then finally, the third Skull Cannon will remain still. Now that the movement phase is over, units are going to tear their way into reality from the warp. So taking a look at where the Khorne units tore in from the warp, Skarbrand is right here. He is just over 9 inches away from Guilliman, and just over 10 inches away from the tactical marines that are right next to Guilliman. These Bloodletters are just over 9 inches away from Guilliman. This Bloodthirster is right here, technically in the ruin, I suppose. Let me know in the comments down below whether or not a model is actually able to deep strike into something that is not on the ground floor of the battlefield. It does not say on the Denizens of the Warp card that you are not allowed to have someone appear on a different elevation from the bottom level. And this is the only place I could get him to fit because of his wings, so that he would be within 9 inches of this Storm Raven, or just over 9 inches I should say, and also be over 9 inches away from Guilliman. And so then finally this Bloodthirster is just over 9 inches away from the tactical marines that are sitting on objective marker 6. These guys right here. So going into the shooting phase, we will start with this Skull Cannon, and it will shoot this Storm Raven. So D6 shots, getting 2 shots. The Storm Raven does start the game in hard to hit mode, in flying mode, so 2 shots hitting on 4s, and both would have failed anyways. Now this Skull Cannon is going to shoot the other Storm Raven. D6 shots, getting 2 shots again. Hitting on 4s, getting 1 hit. Wounding on a 3, and it wounds. -2 AP, so the Storm Raven will have a 5-up armor save, which it passes. And then the final Skull Cannon will also shoot this Storm Raven. D6 shots, getting 6 shots. Hitting on 4s, getting 2 hits. Wounding on 3s, getting 2 wounds. 2 5-up invulnerable saves, and the Storm Raven passes both. I should say armor saves, not invulnerable saves. But either way, it passed both. So now, going into the assault phase, there are 4 charges to declare. First is Skarbrand will declare a multi-charge onto Rabaul Guilliman and the tactical marines. Of course, he will need a 9 to make it into Guilliman, and he will need a 10 to make it into combat with the tactical marines, and Guilliman will be the primary target. Next, this squad of Bloodletters will also declare a charge into Guilliman, and they will need 9 inches to make it into combat. Then this Bloodthirster will charge into the Storm Raven, and he will need 9 inches to make it in. And finally, this Bloodthirster will declare a charge into these tactical marines inside of this ruin, and he will need 9 inches to make it in. And so we will start with Skarbrand, which means first we need to resolve the Overwatch from Guilliman and the tactical marines. So starting with Guilliman and his Hand of Dominion in shooting form. Skarbrand is in rapid fire range, so 6 shots hitting on 6s, getting 1 hit and 5 rerolls. And here's the 5 rerolls, getting an additional hit. Wounding on 5s, and getting 2 wounds. -1 AP, so 2 4-up armor saves, and he passes 1 and fails 1. And the Hand of Dominion does 2 damage, so Skarbrand will drop from 16 starting wounds down to 14. And so now for the tactical marines, we'll start with the bolt guns, and only 2 of the bolt guns are within 12 inches for rapid fire, so there's only going to be 6 shots from the bolt guns instead of 8. hitting on 6s, and all fail to hit. And here's the reroll, still all failing to hit. And then finally the last cannon hitting on a 6, which fails to hit, and a reroll, which will hit. Wounding on a 3, and it wounds. And one 5-up invulnerable save, which fails. And it will do d6 damage, and it will do 4 damage. And so Skarbrand will fall from 14 wounds down to 10. And so now he will attempt to charge in, and he will have 2 chances at this. So the first attempt will make it in with a 9. So he will not get into combat with the Tactical Marines, but he will make it into combat with Revout Guilliman. And so now Skarbrand will be in combat purely with Guilliman. Next, these Bloodletters will attempt to charge into Guilliman, and they are only charging into Guilliman, so there will be no Overwatch this time. And because they are within 6 inches of the Bloodthirster, still, they will get 2 chances to charge in. And so here's the first charge from the Bloodletters, and they fail with a 6. And here is their second attempt, and they fail with a 4. So the Bloodletters will not make it into combat. So now this Bloodthirster will declare its charge into the Stormraven, and so the Stormraven will be able to Overwatch. However, the Stormraven is not within 6 inches of Guilliman, but it is within 12, just within 12. So the Stormraven will start with the 2 Hurricane Bolters, 24 shots, hitting on 6s. However, because he's only just within 12 inches and not 6 of Guilliman, he only gets to re-roll hit rolls of 1. So 24 shots, hitting on 6s. So getting 5 hits and 3 re-rolls. And here's the 3 re-rolls, getting a 6th hit. Wounding on 5s, no rerolls, but still getting 4 wounds. 4 3-up armor saves, and passes all 4. So now the Twin Heavy Bolter, 6 shots, hitting on 6s, rerolling 1s, getting 2 hits and 1 reroll. And here's the 1 reroll, still failing to hit. Wounding on 5s, no rerolls, getting 1 wound. 1 4-up armor save, which passes. 2 Storm Strike missile launchers, hitting on 6s, rerolling 1s, and failing to hit. And so now the Twin Heavy Plasma Cannon, which will fire supercharged shots. So 2 D3 shots, getting 6 shots, hitting on 6s, rerolling 1s, and getting 1 hit and no 1s. So wounding on a 3, and it wounds, and 1 5-up invulnerable save, which fails. And since it's supercharged, it does 2 damage apiece, and so the Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage will go from 16 starting wounds down to 14. And now it will attempt to charge in, and it fails with a 2. It needs a 9, but it does get to retry, and it still fails with a 5. So the Bloodthirster will not charge the Stormraven. And then finally, this Bloodthirster will attempt to charge the Tactical Marines. And so with Overwatch, starting with the bolt guns, 3 of the bolt guns are within 12-inch rapid-fire range, so 7 shots total, hitting on 6s and getting 2 hits. No rerolls. Wounding on 5s and getting 1 wound. 1 3-up armor save, which passes. And so then the last cannon, which fails to hit, needing a 6. And so now the charge range for the Bloodthirster, needing a 9 and fails with a 7. But it gets a second chance, needs a 9, and fails with another 7. So the second Bloodthirster will also fail to make it into combat. This means that the only fight to resolve in the fight phase is Skarbrand versus Guilliman. And so Skarbrand will go first, and he will pile in. So Skarbrand, since he still has 10 wounds left, has 6 attacks base, plus 1 attack for charging, and plus 1 attack for being within 8 inches of himself, for a total of 8 attacks, and he will put all 8 attacks onto Revout Guilliman using the Mighty Strike from Slaughter and Carnage. So hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s, and getting 7 hits so far with no 6s. And here's the reroll, which gets an 8th hit, but once again, no 6s, so no automatic additional hits. Strength 16 versus Toughness 6 is 2s to wound, and getting 7 wounds and 1 fail. 7 3-up invulnerable saves, and Guilliman passes 4 and fails 3. And so Guilliman is going to use 1 command point in order to use the command reroll in order to reroll the 2. But first, does he get the command point back on a 5? And he does not. So the Ultramarines are now permanently down to 8 command points. However, on a 3-up, he saves the wound, and he does. Should have done that in the opposite order, apparently. But he saves 1 more wound, which means 2 wounds go through, and they do d6 damage apiece, and it will do 9 damage. And so this will mean, since Guilliman only has 9 wounds, that Guilliman is killed off. However, thanks to Guilliman's Armor of Fate, we will roll a dice. The first timer about Guilliman is reduced to 0 wounds. Roll a d6. On a 4-up, set him up again at the end of the phase, as close as possible to his previous position, and more than 1 inch away from any enemies, with d6 wounds remaining. And so technically that happens at the end of the fight phase, and we're not quite at the end of the fight phase yet, so that we will hold off on rolling that dice for the time being. So for the moment, Guilliman is killed, and Skarbrand will consolidate into combat with the Tactical Marines. And he's technically now within an inch. Which means that while Skarbrand cannot fight anymore this turn, the Tactical Marines will get to pile in and fight back. However, thanks to being on the ruin, only 3 of the Tactical Marines, one of which will be the Sergeant, will be able to strike back onto Skarbrand. So, 7 attacks back from the Tactical Marines, hitting on 3s. And no rerolls, but getting 6 hits. Wounding on 5s, getting 3 wounds. 3 3-up armor saves, passes 2 and fails 1. So Skarbrand will drop from 10 wounds down to 9. So, now Guilliman gets to roll the dice to see if he comes back. And this is a huge deal, because if Guilliman comes back, then obviously his aura of abilities for reroll hit and wound rolls comes back, but it also then denies 3 victory points for the Chaos Demons of Khorne. It denies Slay the Warlord, it denies First Blood, and it denies the tactical objective card Assassinate. And unfortunately, this is still part of the fight phase for the Ultramarines, which means they cannot use a command reroll dice if they failed to get a 4, because Guilliman used a command reroll for his invuln. So, on a 4-up, and he fails to come back, and so Guilliman is slain. So going into the morale phase, there are no morale checks to take. So taking a look at the tactical objective cards. Obviously, Chaos Demons of Khorne did not finish defending Objective 2. They did, however, complete Assassinate, thanks to slaying Guilliman for 1 victory point. And they obviously did not finish defending Objective 6. And so, thanks to slaying Guilliman, at the end of Chaos Demons of Khorne turn 1, the score currently sits at 3 victory points for Khorne and 0 victory points for the Ultramarines. So going into Ultramarines turn 1, a reminder that the Ultramarines have 8 command points left, and the Chaos Demons of Khorne have 0 command points left. So at the beginning of the turn, the Ultramarines need to draw 3 new tactical objective cards, and they draw Secure Objective 6, score 1 victory point if you control Objective Marker 6 at the end of your turn. Hold the Line, score 1 victory point if you have at least 3 units completely within your deployment zone, and your opponent has no models within your deployment zone at the end of your turn. This objective cannot be achieved on your first turn. And Kingslayer, score D3 victory points if your opponent's Warlord has been destroyed during this or any previous turn. Going into the movement phase, this squad of Tactical Marines will remain still. This Storm Raven is going to drop into hover mode, and the Centurions and the Chaplain inside will disembark. And the Centurions will end up here, and the Chaplain will end up here, and they are within 3 inches of the base of the Storm Raven. And so now the Chaplain will move 6 inches up the board towards Skarbrand, and then the Centurions will move 4 inches up the board towards Skarbrand. And they will finish their movement like this. And now this Storm Raven, which is in hover mode, will move up to 20 inches up the board. And the Storm Raven will finish its movement here. In this tactical squad, the last cannon will remain still, but the sergeant and the 3 Marines with bolt guns are going to reposition slightly so that they will all be within 12-inch rapid-fire range of the Bloodthirster that attempted to charge them the previous turn. And so now, with the sergeant and one of the Marines down on the bottom floor, all models are within 12 inches of that Bloodthirster, and they are also now more securely holding Objective Marker 6. This tactical squad that is in close combat with Scarbrand will remain locked in combat. And finally, this Storm Raven is going to remain in flying mode, and it will fly up to 45 inches up the board. And the Storm Raven will finish its flight here. This does mean, of course, that the Demon Prince of Khorne with Skull Reaver is the closest visible enemy unit to that Storm Raven for the purpose of targeting in the shooting phase. So, going into the shooting phase, the last cannon from this tactical squad will shoot this Bloodthirster, the one that is down to 14 wounds. So, hitting on a 3, and it hits. Wounding on a 3, and it wounds. 1 5-up invulnerable save, which passes. The tactical Marines locked in combat with Scarbrand will all fire their pistols into him. 5 shots, hitting on 3s and getting 3 hits. Wounding on 5s, getting 1 wound. 1 3-up armor save, which fails. This means that Scarbrand will drop from 9 wounds down to 8. Now the chaplain is going to fire his combi flamer into this squad of bloodletters, and of course only the bolt gun will be able to reach. However, he is within rapid fire range, so 2 shots hitting on 3s, getting 1 hit. Wounding on a 3, and it wounds. 1 5-up invulnerable save, which passes. So now these 2 Centurions will shoot their flamers into the same bloodletter squad. The Centurion Sergeant is too far away. 2 flamers apiece, so 4d6 shots, and only getting 10 shots. It automatically hits, so 10 hits. So wounding on 3s, and only getting 5 wounds. 5 5-up invulnerable saves, and they fail all 5. So 5 bloodletters will go down, leaving 5 left. Then this squad of tactical Marines will fire into the Bloodthirster, and they will use the stratagem Scions of Guilliman for 1 command point, taking them from 8 command points down to 7. And because Guilliman has been slain, they do not get to attempt to roll to get the command point back anymore. Use this stratagem when an Ultramarines infantry or Ultramarines biker unit is selected to attack in the shooting or fight phase. You can re-roll all hit rolls of 1 for that unit for the rest of the phase. If the unit is a tactical squad or intercessor squad, re-roll all failed hit rolls instead. So starting with the 4 bolt guns, which are in rapid fire range, so 8 shots hitting on 3s, hitting 6 hits and 2 re-rolls. And here's the 2 re-rolls, getting 8 hits. Wounding on 5s, and getting 2 wounds. 2 3-up armor saves. Passes 1 and fails 1. Which means that this Bloodthirster drops from 16 starting wounds down to 15. And finally, the last cannon hitting on a 3, which hits. Wounding on a 3, and it wounds. 1 5-up invulnerable save, which fails. And it does d6 damage, and it will do 5 damage. And so this Bloodthirster will drop from 15 wounds down to 10 left. So now the Storm Raven that is in hover mode is going to fire its Storm Strike missile launchers and its heavy plasma cannon, its twin heavy plasma cannon, into the Bloodthirster that is down to 10 wounds. And it will fire its 2 Hurricane Bolters and its twin Heavy Bolter into the squad of 8 Fleshhounds. So, starting with the 2 Storm Strike missile launchers. 2 shots, hitting on 3s, getting 1 hit. Wounding on a 3, and it wounds. 1 5-up invulnerable save, which fails. And it does an automatic 3 damage, so the Bloodthirster drops from 10 wounds down to 7. So then the Storm Raven will fire its twin heavy plasma cannon into the same Bloodthirster, and it will fire supercharged shots. So 2 D3 shots, and only gets 3 shots. The Ultramarines will use 1 command point, going from 7 down to 6, to use a command reroll in order to reroll the 1. And here's the reroll, bringing them up to a total of 4 shots. Hitting on 3s, and getting 4 hits. Wounding on 3s, getting 2 wounds. 2 5-up invulnerable saves, and both fail. And since it was supercharged, they are 2 damage apiece, so the Bloodthirster will drop from 7 wounds down to 3 left. Now for the 2 Hurricane Bolters into the Fleshhounds, they are in rapid fire range, so 24 shots hitting on 3s, and getting 18 hits. Wounding on 4s, and getting 10 wounds. 10 5-up invulnerable saves, and they pass 4 of them, failing 6. This means that 3 Fleshhounds will be removed, leaving 5 left. And then finally, the Twin Heavy Bolter, 6 shots hitting on 3s, and getting 5 hits. Wounding on 3s, and only getting 1 wound. 1 5-up invulnerable save, which fails. And so 1 more Fleshhound will be reduced to 1 wound. So then finally, the Stormraven, which flew, is going to fire its Storm Strike missile launchers and its Twin Heavy Plasma Cannon into the Demon Prince, and it will fire its 2 Hurricane Bolters and its Twin Heavy Bolter into the Fleshhounds. Starting with the Twin Heavy Bolter, 6 shots hitting on 3s and getting 3 hits. Wounding on 3s, getting 1 wound. 1 5-up invulnerable save, which fails. And so the wounded Fleshhound is killed off. And so now the 24 shots from the Hurricane Bolters hitting on 3s with 1 cocked dice. Here's the cocked dice, getting another hit. And even without rerolls, getting a very good hit roll of 22 hits out of 24 shots. Wounding on 4s, getting 12 wounds. 12 5-up invulnerable saves, and they pass 5 of them, failing 7. And so 3 more Fleshhounds are removed, and the final Fleshhound goes down to 1 wound. Now for the 2 Stormstrike missile launchers onto the Demon Prince, hitting on 3s, getting 2 hits. Wounding on 3s, getting 2 wounds. 2 5-up invulnerable saves, passes 1 and fails 1. And so the Demon Prince will drop from 8 starting wounds down to 5. Now the Stormraven will finally fire its Twin Heavy Plasma Cannon, and it will fire supercharged shots. 2 D3 shots, getting 4 shots. Hitting on 3s, getting 2 hits and 2 ones. So first, the Stormraven is going to use the stratagem Armor of Contempt for 1 command point, which will drop them from 6 command points down to 5. Use the stratagem when an Adeptus Astartes vehicle suffers a mortal wound. Roll a d6 for that mortal wound and each other mortal wound inflicted on this model for the rest of the phase. On a 5-up, that mortal wound is ignored and has no effect. So first, looking for 5-ups, and he saves 1 of the mortal wounds. But that means the Stormraven will still suffer 1 mortal wound, and so it will drop from 14 starting wounds down to 13. And now on the 2 hits, looking for 3s to wound, and getting 2 wounds. 2 5-up invulnerable saves, and fails both. And so the Demon Prince of Khorne with Skull Reaver will drop from 5 remaining wounds down to 1 left. So going into the assault phase, we have 2 charges to declare. First is this Chaplain declaring a charge onto Skarbrand, and then the Centurions declaring a charge onto Skarbrand. And there is no Overwatch because Skarbrand is already locked in combat. So starting with the Chaplain, and he will make it in with a 5. And so now the Chaplain will be locked in combat right here. Now the Centurions will charge in, getting 3 inches, which is just enough for the Sergeant to be within an inch of Skarbrand. However, the Ultramarines would like more of the Centurions to make it into an inch so that they can use their Centurion assault launchers. So the Ultramarines are going to use 1 command point, going from 5 down to 4, now that it's a new phase, to use a command reroll to reroll the 1. And they have already made, they will definitely make it into combat, so they don't have to worry about getting anything worse. And now they get an 8-inch charge. So the Centurions will definitely be in. And all of the Centurions will be in base to base. And so we will start with the attacks from the Centurions. And so first we will do the Centurion assault launchers, looking for 4-ups and only getting 1. And this technically happens in the assault phase because it happens right after you finish an assault move, which means they cannot use another command reroll to reroll one of those dice, since they've already used command reroll in the assault phase. So 1 mortal wound onto Skarbrand. So Skarbrand will drop from 8 wounds down to 7. And so thanks to being within 8 inches of Skarbrand, who is their target, the Centurions will have 10 attacks total with their siege drills. Hitting on 3s, re-rolling thanks to the Chaplain, and getting 8 hits so far. And here's the 2 re-rolls, getting 1 additional hit. Strength 10 versus Toughness 7 means 3s to wound, and getting 6 wounds. 6 5-up invulnerable saves. And he passes 3 and fails 3, and they do an automatic 3 damage apiece, so that is 9 damage onto Skarbrand. And this means that Skarbrand, with only 7 wounds left, will be killed off. And so now the Tactical Marines will not consolidate, but the Centurions and the Chaplain will. And they will all consolidate to here to be in slightly better formation. So going into the morale phase, we will start with this squad of Bloodletters. They lost 5 models this turn. However, they are within 6 inches of a Bloodthirster, so they will have a leadership of 10. This means that they will only lose an additional model if they roll a 6, and they pass. The only other unit that needs to take a morale check this turn is this squad of Fleshhounds, which lost 7 models this turn, and unfortunately for them, they are not within 6 inches of a Bloodthirster, which means since they lost 7 models and only have a leadership of 7, it is impossible for them to pass, and therefore the final Fleshhound is killed off. So now, taking a look at the tactical objective cards, the Ultramarines did successfully secure Objective 6 for 1 victory point. Now that they've killed Skarbrand, they have successfully held the line for 1 victory point, because there are no other Khorne units that deep struck in from the warp that are at all partially within the deployment zone. They're all outside. And the Ultramarines obviously have at least 3 units, considering the fact that the Tactical Marine squads, all 3 of them, have not really moved further up the board. And also thanks to killing Skarbrand, the Ultramarines also accomplished Kingslayer, which will give them D3 victory points. And so here's the roll for that, and they get 2 victory points. So at the end of Ultramarines turn 1, thanks to killing Skarbrand, who is the Chaos Demons of Khorne Warlord, which gives the Ultramarines Slay the Warlord, the Ultramarines have a score of 5 victory points, and the Chaos Demons of Khorne have a score of 3 victory points. Going into Chaos Demons of Khorne turn 2, a reminder that the Chaos Demons of Khorne have 0 command points left, and the Ultramarines have 4 command points left. A reminder that the Chaos Demons of Khorne held on to Defend Objective 6 and Defend Objective 2 from the previous turn. However, since this is the mission, Targets of Opportunity, they have to throw away both of those objective cards at the start of this turn. But the Chaos Demons of Khorne drew 3 new tactical objective cards, and they drew Kingslayer, score D3 victory points if your opponent's warlord has been destroyed during this or any previous turn. That's a guaranteed D3 victory points. Cycle of Life, score 1 victory point if an enemy infantry unit was destroyed during this turn. If an enemy infantry unit was destroyed by one of your Nurgle demon units during this turn, score D3 victory points instead. And Advance, score 1 victory point if no units from your army is within your deployment zone at the end of your turn. So going into the movement phase, we will start by having this squad of Bloodletters continue to march up the board, and they will also declare an advance. And here's their advance roll, only getting 1 additional inch for 7 inches of total movement. And so the Bloodletters will finish their movement right here. Next, this Skull Cannon will remain still. Now this Demon Prince of Khorne is going to fly up the board 12 inches towards the Storm Raven that is in hover mode. And it will finish its movement right here, just over an inch away from the Storm Raven. Now this squad of Bloodletters is going to move up the board 6 inches. And they will finish their movement right here, and they are just over 2 inches away from the base of the Storm Raven. However, if they do decide to charge it, which they can since it's in hover mode, they will need at least 4 inches of charge because they will be charging through a couple of craters. This Skull Cannon will remain still, and this Skull Cannon will remain still. This Bloodthirster, now that it's down to 3 wounds, has only 6 inches of movement, and so it will move 6 inches up the board towards the Tactical Marines that are on this ruin. And it will finish up right here. I do apologize about the lighting, but there are Tactical Marines sitting in the shadow of this ruin, and they are within 2 inches base to base of the Bloodthirster. At least the closest one is. So he will be guaranteed to make it into charge as long as he does not suffer 3 wounds in Overwatch. This Bloodthirster, which still has 14 wounds left, still has a full 12-inch movement, and so it will move up the board towards the Centurions. And so the Bloodthirster moved over to this side, and he is just over an inch away from this Centurion. He is just under 3 inches away from this Chaplain, which means 2 inches would put him in combat, and that also means he's within range of these Tactical Marines, should he perform a multi-charge. And so then finally, these Bloodletters will move up the board 6 inches towards the Centurions, and they will end up right here, just over an inch away from the Centurions. Going into the shooting phase, all 3 skull cannons on the Chaos Demons of Khorne side are within range and can see the Storm Raven that is in hover mode, and so all 3 will fire at it. In case the Storm Raven is killed off, however, from one of the skull cannons and not the last one, we will do them one at a time so that any other skull cannons that are still able to fire can select a different target, since they are part of different units and therefore do not have to declare their targets right now. So we will start with this one. So D6 shots, getting 4 shots, hitting on 3s, getting 3 hits, wounding on 3s, getting 3 wounds. 3 5-up armor saves, passes 2 and fails 1, and it will do D3 damage, and it will only do 1 damage, which means that this Storm Raven will drop from 14 starting wounds down to 13, and now this Skull Cannon will fire at it. D6 shots, getting 4 shots again, hitting on 3s, getting 4 hits, wounding on 3s, getting 2 wounds. 2 5-up armor saves, passes 1 and fails 1. And this will do D3 damage, and it will also only do 1 damage. And so the Storm Raven will fall from 13 wounds down to 12 left. And so then finally this Skull Cannon will shoot the Storm Raven. D6 shots, getting 2 shots. Hitting on 3s, getting 2 hits. Wounding on 3s, getting 2 wounds. 2 5-up armor saves, and passes both of them. So, going into the assault phase, we have a lot of charges to declare. Starting with this squad of Bloodletters declaring a charge onto the hovering Storm Raven. Then this Demon Prince will declare a charge onto the hovering Storm Raven. Then this Bloodthirster will declare a charge onto those Tactical Marines. This Bloodthirster will declare a multi-charge onto the Centurions, the Chaplain, and the Tactical Marines. And finally, these Bloodletters will declare a charge onto the Centurions. And so we will start with this Bloodthirster. And so first, the Centurions will overwatch with their Flamers. Each Centurion has 2 Flamers apiece, so 6 D6 shots, getting only 13 shots. This weapon automatically hits, however, so 13 hits. And wounding on 5s, getting 4 wounds. 4 3-up armor saves, and he passes all 4. So now the Chaplain will overwatch with his Combi Flamer, starting with the bolt gun profile. 2 shots, hitting on 6s, getting 1 hit. Wounding on a 5, and it fails to wound. And now D6 shots from the Flamer, getting 5 shots. Automatically hits, so 5 hits. Wounding on 5s, and all fail to wound. And then the Tactical Marine Squad will overwatch, starting with the 4 bolt guns. 8 shots, hitting on 6s, getting 1 hit. Wounding on a 5, and it fails to wound. So then finally the last cannon, hitting on a 6, and fails to hit. So charge range from the Bloodthirster, 6 inches, more than enough. And so now the Bloodthirster is in close combat with all 3 units. This means, of course, that the Centurions are unable to overwatch against the Bloodletters, and since they are less than 2 inches away, they will automatically make it into combat. And so now they are all in close combat with the Centurions. Next, this Bloodthirster will charge in, and it will automatically make it in since it's less than 2 inches away. However, the Tactical Marines will get to overwatch first. So, starting with the last cannon, hitting on a 6, and it fails to hit. And then the 8 shots from the 4 bolt guns, hitting on 6s, and all fail to hit. And while he'll automatically make it in, he also gets 6 inches total of charge if he wanted. Which means that this Bloodthirster will now be in combat with those Tactical Marines. Next, we will do the Bloodletters charge onto the Storm Raven to soak up the overwatch. Starting with the 24 shots from the 2 Hurricane Bolters, hitting on 6s, and getting 4 6s. Wounding on 3s, getting 2 wounds. 2 5-up invulnerable saves, and they fail both. So 2 Bloodletters will be killed off. Now the Twin Heavy Bolter. 6 shots, hitting on 6s, getting 1 hit. Wounding on a 3, and it wounds. 1 5-up invulnerable save, which fails. And so 1 more Bloodletter will go down. And now the 2 Storm Strike missile launchers, hitting on 6s, failing to hit. And finally the Twin Heavy Plasma Cannon, which will fire standard shots. So 2 D3 shots, getting 4 shots. Hitting on 6s, and all fail to hit. And here's the charge range from the Bloodletters, getting 11 inches. And so after subtracting 2 from the charge roll for charging through a crater, all 7 remaining Bloodletters, including the 1 Blood Reaper, will be in combat with the Storm Raven. And so then finally the Demon Prince will charge in, and he's less than 2 inches away, and not charging through a crater, so the Demon Prince with 1 wound left will automatically make it into combat. So going into the fight phase of Chaos Demons of Khorne turn 2, the Chaos Demons of Khorne are going to start by having this Bloodthirster place all of his attacks onto the Centurions. So since the Bloodthirster is still at 14 wounds, he has 6 attacks base plus 1 for charging, so he has 7 attacks total. Hitting on 2s, and getting 7 hits with 2 6s, which generate additional automatic hits for 9 hits total out of 7 attacks. Wounding on 2s with 1 cocked dice. Here's the reroll of the cocked dice, getting another wound, but getting 3 1s. So 6 wounds go through, and these are minus 4 AP, so the Centurions will take 6 6-up armor saves. And they pass 3 of them. Oh my goodness. So the 3 that go through do d6 damage apiece, but because we're using the Mighty Strike of the Great Axe of Khorne, we roll 2 dice and take the highest. So strike number 1 will do 3 damage, and the Centurions have 3 wounds apiece, so that is 1 dead Centurion. The second strike will do 5 damage, and so that will kill off a second Centurion. And so then finally the third strike will also do 3 damage, which will kill off the third Centurion. And so the Bloodthirster does exactly what it needs to kill off the 3 Centurions. And so now the Ultramarines are going to use the stratagem Counteroffensive for 2 command points, bringing them from 4 down to 2 left. This stratagem is used right after an enemy unit that charged has fought. Select one of your own eligible units and fight with it next. And the Ultramarines are going to select their Storm Raven that was charged, and it's going to try to finish off the 1 wound on the Demon Prince of Khorne. And so the Storm Raven has 3 attacks base, since it still has 12 wounds left, and it will place all 3 attacks onto the Demon Prince of Khorne, hitting on 6s, and getting 1 hit. Strength 8 versus Toughness 6 means a 3 to wound, and it wounds. The Demon Prince has a 3-up armor save, which it passes. These Bloodletters only declare to charge onto the Centurions, and so they are no longer locked in combat. But they can consolidate up to 3 inches, and so they will consolidate into combat with the Chaplain. And so they will now be locked in combat with the Chaplain, but they will not be able to attack the Chaplain since they did not declare a charge against the Chaplain. Next, we will do this Bloodthirster against the Tactical Marines. The Bloodthirster, now that it's down to 3 wounds, only has 2 attacks base, plus 1 on the charge for 3 attacks total, and it will use the Sweeping Blow against the Tactical Marines, which allows it to make 2 hit rolls per base attack. So 6 attacks onto the Tactical Marines, hitting on 4s, and only getting 2 hits. Strength 8 on the charge versus Toughness 4 means 2s to wound, and getting 2 wounds. Minus 2 AP, so 2 5-up armor saves, and fails both. So 2 Tactical Marines will go down. And the Bloodthirster did have a hit roll of a 6, which would have generated 1 additional automatic hit, so wounding on 2 with that one, and it wounds, and a 5-up armor save, which saved, so no additional Marines are lost. And now the Demon Prince will attack the Storm Raven. 6 attacks on the charge with Skull Reaver, plus 1 additional attack from its Malefic Talon. Starting with Skull Reaver, 6 attacks, hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s, and getting 5 hits with 1 reroll. And here's the reroll, getting a 6th hit. Wounding on 3s, hitting 4 wounds and an additional D3 mortal wounds. So here's the D3 mortal wounds, doing 2 mortal wounds, which will drop the Storm Raven from 12 wounds down to 10. And then the 4 wounds from Skull Reaver are minus 4 AP, so no armor save, and these will do D6 damage apiece. for a total of 17 damage, which will kill off the Storm Raven. And on a 6, it crashes and burns, and it does not. So this Storm Raven is removed. And the only one who consolidated was the Demon Prince, that he could move slightly closer to the Tactical Marines. The Bloodthirster with 3 wounds was fighting, which is the closest visible enemy unit, and this way now the Bloodletters are slightly more in between him and the Flying Storm Raven. So now that all of the charging units have gone, we will start on the Ultramarine side because it's only Ultramarine models left to fight. We'll start with these Tactical Marines, and there are 3 Tactical Marines including 1 Sergeant. So 4 attacks onto the Bloodthirster, hitting on 3s, getting 4 hits, wounding on 5s, and failing to wound. Now these Tactical Marines will attack the Bloodthirster, and just like with Scarbrand, because of the way that the Ruin is, only 3 of the Marines, including the 1 Sergeant, are able to fight. So 4 attacks, hitting on 3s, getting 4 hits, wounding on 5s, and getting 2 wounds. 2 3-up armor saves, and passes both. And then finally, the Chaplain will fight with his Crozius Arcanum. 3 attacks, hitting on 2s, getting 3 hits, wounding on 5s, and failing to wound. So going into the morale phase, this squad of Bloodletters lost 3 models this turn. And here's their morale check, and they roll a 5, which means they fail by 1. And so 1 Bloodletter will go down, leaving 6 left. And then this tactical squad. Thanks to being Ultramarines, the Sergeant has a leadership of 9, which means it's impossible for them to fail after only losing 2 models. So now taking a look at the tactical objective cards, Chaos Demons of Khorne, of course, have completed Kingslayer. And this is worth D3 victory points, and they get 3 victory points. They did also complete Cycle of Life because the Centurions are an infantry squad, and so they get 1 victory point for that. However, Chaos Demons of Khorne failed to complete Advance. And so, at the end of Chaos Demons of Khorne Turn 2, the score currently sits at 7 victory points for the Chaos Demons of Khorne, and 5 victory points for the Ultramarines. Going into Ultramarines Turn 2, a reminder that the Ultramarines have 2 command points left, and the Chaos Demons of Khorne have 0 command points left. And the Ultramarines needed to draw 3 new tactical objective cards, and they drew Defend Objective 1, score 2 victory points if you control Objective Marker 1 at the end of 2 consecutive turns, Defend Objective 3, score 2 victory points if you control Objective Marker 3 at the end of 2 consecutive turns, and Witch Hunter, score 1 victory point if at least 1 enemy Psyker was destroyed during your turn. And all 3 of those objective cards are worthless. Objective Marker 3 is this one right here next to this Skull Cannon, and Objective Marker 1 is this one right here next to this Bloodthirster. And the Ultramarines are going to start by having this Storm Raven go into hover mode, and the Chaplain and the Centurions inside will disembark. And so the Chaplain disembarked right here within 3 inches of the base, and the Centurions disembarked here within 3 inches of the base. And so now this Chaplain is going to move 6 inches through the doorway of this ruin to be closer to this Skull Cannon. And he will end his movement right here, just over 1 inch away from the Skull Cannon. And now these Centurions are going to move up the board 4 inches, and they will also declare an advance. And here's their advance roll, getting 4 additional inches for 8 inches of total movement. And so the Centurions will finish their movement here. The Storm Raven, which is now in hover mode, will now move 20 inches back down the board towards the Ultramarines deployment zone. And it will finish its movement here. The 3 tactical Marines are going to now fall back out of combat away from the Bloodthirster. And they will end up here, over 1 inch away from the Bloodthirster. And now the Chaplain will fall back out of combat. Right to there, and he is now over 1 inch away from both the Bloodthirster and the Bloodletters. And then these tactical Marines are going to fall back out of combat. And they are now fully out of combat with the Bloodthirster. This squad of tactical Marines is going to reshuffle a little bit. And they will reshuffle like so now the last cannon is up on top of the ruin. Going into the shooting phase of Ultramarines Turn 2, we will start with the 3 Centurions who will fire their flamers into this squad of Bloodletters. And since the flamers are assault weapons, they can be fired even though they advanced. So 6d6 shots, getting 17 shots. This weapon automatically hits, so 17 hits. And wounding on 3s, getting 10 wounds. 10 5-up invulnerable saves, and they pass 2, but fail 8. And so these 6 models are burned up and killed off. So now this chaplain is going to fire its combi flamer into the skull cannon. Starting with the bolt gun profile. 2 shots hitting on 4s and getting 1 hit. Wounding on a 5, and it fails to wound. Then the flamer does d6 shots, getting 2 shots. It automatically hits, so 2 hits. Wounding on 5s and getting 1 wound. 1 3-up armor save, which fails. And so this skull cannon will drop from 7 starting wounds down to 6. So now this chaplain will fire its combi flamer into the bloodletters. Starting with the 2 shots from the bolt gun, hitting on 5s because he fell back from combat, and as an Ultramarine he can fall back and still shoot, but he has to subtract 1 from the hit roll. He also has to subtract 1 from the hit roll for firing both profiles. So hitting on a 5, but he gets a 6, so 1 hit. Wounding on a 3, and it wounds, and a 5-up invulnerable save, which passes. And so now d6 shots from the flamer, getting a cocked dice, and getting 6 shots. And it automatically hits, so 6 hits, wounding on 3s, and getting 4 wounds. 4 5-up invulnerable saves, passes 1 and fails 3. And so 3 regular bloodletters will go down, leaving 2 models left in the squad. And so then this squad of tactical marines, the last cannon will fire into the bloodthirster, and the 4 bolt guns will fire rapid fire into the 2 remaining bloodletters. Starting with the last cannon, which will hit on a 5. And it hits. -1 for falling back, but still being able to shoot, and -1 for moving and shooting a heavy weapon. So needing a 5, but gets a 6. Wounding on a 3, and it wounds. 1 5-up invulnerable save, which fails. And this will do d6 damage, and it will do 6 damage. And so this bloodthirster will fall from 14 remaining wounds down to 8 left. And now for the 4 bolt guns, 8 shots hitting on 4s, and only getting 2 hits. Wounding on 3s, and both fail to wound. So next, this squad of tactical marines is going to fire into this bloodthirster, and they will use the stratagem Scions of Guilliman for 1 command point, dropping them from 2 down to 1 left, in order to reroll all failed hit rolls. And so starting with the last cannon, hitting on a 4, which hits. Wounding on a 3, and it wounds. 1 5-up invulnerable save, which fails. And this will do d6 damage, and it will do 3 damage. And so the bloodthirster will drop from 8 wounds down to 5 left. Now for the 4 bolt guns, they are not in rapid fire range, so 1 shot apiece, 4 shots hitting on 3s, re-rolling thanks to Scions of Guilliman. And the 2 re-rolls, getting 1 more hit. Wounding on 5s, getting 2 wounds. 2 3-up armor saves, and fails both of them. And so the bloodthirster will drop from 5 wounds down to 3 left. Then this tactical marine squad will fire everything it has into this bloodthirster. Starting with the last cannon, which does need a 5, and it gets the 5. Wounding on a 3, and it fails to wound. The Ultramarines are going to use their last command point for a command reroll in order to reroll that dice. And needing a 3, and they get the 3 to wound. 1 5-up invulnerable save, which passes. So now the 2 bolt guns in rapid fire range. 4 shots hitting on 4s and getting 2 hits. Wounding on 5s, getting 1 wound. 1 3-up armor save, which passes. So this might be overkill, but the Storm Raven, which is the last unit that needs to fire in the Ultramarine shooting phase, is going to fire its 2 Hurricane Bolters into the squad of 2 Bloodletters, and it will fire its 2 Stormstrike Missile Launchers, its Twin Heavy Bolter, and its Twin Heavy Plasma Cannon into the Bloodthirster right here. So, starting with 24 shots from the 2 Hurricane Bolters, hitting on 3s, and 1 cocked dice, getting 16 hits. Wounding on 3s, getting 13 wounds, 13 5-up invulnerable saves, and they pass 5 but fail 8. And so these 2 bloodletters are removed. Now for the 2 Stormstrike Missile Launchers into the Bloodthirster, hitting on 3s, getting 2 hits. Wounding on 3s, getting 2 wounds, 2 5-up invulnerable saves, and fails both. And they do 3 damage apiece, so this Bloodthirster, which is down to 3 wounds, is completely annihilated. And because of the way that targeting and declaring shots works, the rest of the weapons, which is the Twin Heavy Bolter and the Twin Heavy Plasma Cannon on the Storm Raven, go to waste. So, going into the assault phase for Ultramarines turn 2, there's one charge to declare, which is this chaplain declaring a charge onto the Skull Cannon. And so the Skull Cannon will overwatch, getting 6 shots, hitting on 6s, and fails to hit. Charge range for the chaplain definitely makes it in. And so the chaplain will now definitely be in combat against the Skull Cannon. So 3 attacks from the Crozius Arcanum, hitting on 2s and getting 3 hits, wounding on 5s and failing to wound. So then the Skull Cannon will attack back to attack space, +1 since it was charged, hitting on 3s. Getting 2 hits, wounding on 3s, getting 2 wounds, and one of them was double damage. So the chaplain will activate the force field from the Armor Indomitus for a 3-up invulnerable save for this one turn. And so starting with the double damage, which passes, and the single damage, which also passes. So no damage taken. And so now that the fight phase is over, we go into the morale phase, and there are no morale checks to take. So taking a quick look at the tactical objective cards, the Ultramarines failed to finish defending Objective 1, they failed to finish defending Objective 3, and they failed to achieve Witch Hunter. And so next turn, at the beginning of Ultramarines turn 3, they will throw all 3 of those objective cards away and draw 3 new ones. Which means at the end of Ultramarines turn 2, the score is still the same, with 5 victory points for the Ultramarines and 7 victory points for the Chaos Demons of Khorne. Going into Chaos Demons of Khorne, turn 3, a reminder that the Chaos Demons of Khorne have 0 command points left, and now the Ultramarines have 0 command points left. Also at the beginning of the turn, the Chaos Demons of Khorne need to throw away Advance from the previous turn. And so the Chaos Demons of Khorne draw 3 new tactical objective cards, and they draw Defend Objective 1, score 2 victory points if you control Objective Marker 1 at the end of 2 consecutive turns. Touched by the Warp, score 1 victory point if you manifested or denied a psychic power during this turn. If you manifested or denied a psychic power with a Tzeentch demon unit during this turn, score D3 victory points instead. And Psychological Warfare, score 1 victory point if your opponent failed a morale check during this turn. If your opponent failed 3 or more morale tests, score D3 victory points instead. And Objective Marker 1 is this one right here, next to this building. So at the start of the movement phase, this squad of Bloodletters is going to march up the board 6 inches, and they will also declare an advance. And here's their advance roll, getting 5 additional inches for 11 inches of total movement. And they will finish their movement right here. Next, this Skull Cannon will remain still. This Skull Cannon will remain locked in combat with the Chaplain. This Skull Cannon will remain still. This Bloodthirster will remain still because it is down to only 6 inches of movement and cannot move to the other side of this wall or these tactical marines. This Demon Prince of Khorne is going to move 12 inches over this wall over into this area, and it will finish its movement right here. So now going into the shooting phase, this Skull Cannon is going to fire into this Storm Raven, which is in hover mode. D6 shots, getting 4 shots. Hitting on 3s, getting 2 hits. Wounding on 3s, getting 2 wounds. 2 5-up armor saves, and fails both. And these do D3 damage apiece for a total of 4 damage. So the Storm Raven will drop from 13 wounds down to 9 left. And now this Skull Cannon will also shoot the same target. D6 shots, getting 6 shots. Hitting on 3s, and only getting 2 hits. Wounding on 3s, and getting 2 wounds. 2 5-up armor saves, and passes 1. So D3 damage, and it will do 3 damage. So the Storm Raven will drop from 9 wounds down to 6. So then moving into the assault phase, we have the Bloodthirster declaring a charge onto the Tactical Marines, and the Demon Prince of Khorne declaring a charge onto the Chaplain. And so we will start with the Overwatch from the Tactical Marines onto the Bloodthirster, starting with the last cannon, needing a 6 and fails to hit. 2 bolt guns in rapid fire range means 4 shots, hitting on 6s and getting 1 hit. Wounding on a 5, and it fails to wound. And the Bloodthirster's charge range makes it in. And so this Bloodthirster will now be in combat with the Tactical Marines. And now the Chaplain will overwatch against the Demon Prince of Khorne, starting with the bolt gun from his Combi Flamer. 2 shots hitting on 6s, both fail to hit. And then D6 shots from the Flamer, getting only 2 shots. It automatically hits, so 2 hits. Wounding on 5s, failing to wound. And the charge range from the Demon Prince And 4 inches will not be enough, as he needs at least 5 to make it within an inch. So he will re-roll thanks to the demonic loci and makes it in with a 10. And so the Demon Prince is now in combat with the Chaplain. And going into the fight phase, we will start with the Demon Prince. 6 attacks on the charge with Skull Reaver, plus 1 additional attack from its Malefic Talon. Starting with Skull Reaver, 6 attacks, hitting on 2s, re-rolling 1s, and getting 3 re-rolls. And here's the re-rolls. Getting 2 more hits, and still 1 failed. Strength 11 on the charge versus Toughness 4 means 2s to wound, and still gets a 1, of course. And no automatic mortal wounds, so just 4 wounds go through. 4 4-up invulnerable saves. Passes 1 and fails 3. And these do d6 damage apiece, but the Chaplain has 4 wounds, and so if the Demon Prince rolls triple 1s, the Chaplain potentially could stay alive. And the Chaplain is completely obliterated with 12 damage. So the Chaplain is removed, and the Demon Prince will consolidate a couple of inches towards the Tactical Marines. Now the Bloodthirster will attack the Tactical Marines. Bloodthirster has 2 attacks base since he only has 3 wounds, but plus 1 for charging for 3 attacks base. And he will use Sweeping Blow, which gives him 2 hit rolls per base attack. So 6 attacks hitting on 4s. Getting 3 hits, and 1 of them is a 6. So getting an additional automatic hit for 4 hits out of 6 attacks. Strength 8 versus Toughness 4 is 2s to wound and getting 4 wounds. 4 5-up armor saves, and they pass 2 of them, of course, so they will survive. And so the final regular Marine and the Sergeant will go down, leaving just the last cannon. And so now this Skull Cannon will get to attack the Chaplain. Only 2 attacks since it was not involved in any charges, hitting on 3s, getting 2 hits, wounding on 3s, getting 1 wound. 1 4-up invulnerable save, which fails. So the Chaplain will go from 4 starting wounds down to 3 left. But now the Chaplain will get to fight back. 3 attacks with the Crozius Arcanum, hitting on 2s, getting 3 hits, wounding on 5s, getting 1 wound. Minus 1 AP, so 1 4-up armor save, which passes. And so then finally, this last cannon will pile in and fight the Bloodthirster. 1 attack, hitting on a 3, and it hits, wounding on a 5, and it fails to wound. So going into the morale phase, the only unit that potentially needs to take a morale check is this unit of Tactical Marines, which did lose 2 models this turn. However, Tactical Marines are normally Leadership 7, but Ultramarines get plus 1 to their leadership, so he is actually leadership 8, which means after only losing 2 models this turn, it is impossible for them to fail a morale check. So they will remain locked in combat. And so taking a look at the tactical objective cards, Chaos Daemons of Khorne did not finish defending Objective 1, they failed to complete Touched by the Warp, and they failed to complete Psychological Warfare. So they achieved no new victory points this turn. And so, at the end of Chaos Daemons of Khorne turn 3, the score is still the same, with 7 victory points for the Chaos Daemons of Khorne, and 5 victory points for the Ultramarines. Going into Ultramarines turn 3, the Ultramarines will start by throwing away the 3 tactical objective cards from the previous turn, which is Defend Objective 1, Defend Objective 3, and Witch Hunter. And then they will draw 3 new tactical objective cards, and they draw Big Game Hunter. Score 1 victory point if at least 1 enemy unit with a wounds characteristic of 10 or more was destroyed during this turn. If at least 1 enemy unit with a wounds characteristic of 20 or more was destroyed during this turn, score D3 victory points instead. Assassinate, score 1 victory point if at least 1 enemy character was destroyed during this turn. If 3 or more enemy characters were destroyed during this turn, score D3 victory points instead. And Defend Objective 6, score 2 victory points if you control Objective Marker 6 at the end of 2 consecutive turns. So going into the movement phase of Ultramarines turn 3, this Tactical Marine Squad will remain still. This Tactical Marine Squad will remain still. This last cannon is going to fall back out of combat with the Bloodthirster. Right to there, into the crater. This Storm Raven is going to go back into flying mode, and it will turn 90 degrees to the left, and it will fly 30 inches now that it's down to 6 wounds. And it will end its movement right here. These Centurions are now going to move 4 inches towards the Chaos Daemons of Khorne deployment zone, and they will finish their movement right here. This Chaplain is now going to fall back out of combat over to here, and it's now right here with its 3 wounds left over an inch away from the Skull Cannon. And so now going into the shooting phase, we will start with the Chaplain shooting his Combi Flamer into the Skull Cannon. Starting with the bolt gun profile, 2 shots hitting on 5s, getting 1 hit, wounding on a 5, and it fails to wound. D6 shots with the Flamer, getting 5 shots. It automatically hits, so 5 hits. Wounding on 5s, getting 3 wounds. 3 3-up armor saves, passes 2 and fails 1. So this Skull Cannon will go from 6 wounds down to 5. Now this squad of Centurions will fire, and they are all within 8 inches of the Skull Cannon. 2 Flamers apiece, so 6 D6 shots, getting 19 shots. It automatically hits, so 19 hits. Wounding on 5s, getting 7 wounds. 7 3-up armor saves, passes 4 and fails 3. So the Skull Cannon will drop from 5 wounds down to 2 left. This Storm Raven is now going to fire its 2 Hurricane Bolters and its Twin Heavy Bolter into these Bloodletters, and it will fire its 2 Storm Strike Missile Launchers and its Twin Heavy Plasma into this Skull Cannon. Now that the Storm Raven is down to 6 wounds, it only has a ballistic skill of 4 up. So, starting with the 2 Hurricane Bolters, 24 shots, hitting on 4s, and only getting 9 hits. Wounding on 3s, getting 8 wounds. 8 5-up invulnerable saves, and they fail all 8. And so 8 Bloodletters are killed off, leaving 1 normal Bloodletter and 1 Blood Reaper left. And now for the 6 shots from the Twin Heavy Bolter, hitting on 4s, getting 2 hits. Wounding on 3s, getting 2 wounds. 2 5-up invulnerable saves, and fails both, which is just enough to completely wipe out this Bloodletter squad. Now for the 2 Storm Strike Missile Launchers into the Skull Cannon. 2 shots, hitting on 4s, getting 1 hit. Wounding on a 3, and it wounds. 1 5-up invulnerable save, which passes. And so then finally, the Twin Heavy Plasma Cannon. The Storm Raven will fire supercharged shots. 2 D3 shots, getting 5 shots. Hitting on 4s, getting 2 hits and 3 mortal wounds. So wounding on 3s, getting 1 wound. 1 5-up invulnerable save, which fails. So the Skull Cannon will drop from 7 starting wounds down to 5 left, but because of the 3 mortal wounds, this Storm Raven will drop from 6 wounds down to 3 left. So now this Tactical Marine squad, the last cannon will fire at the Skull Cannon that the Storm Raven just shot at, and the 4 bolt guns are going to shoot the Demon Prince of Khorne, because they can see him through the windows of the ruin, and he is within 24 inches of all 4 bolt guns. So starting with the last cannon, hitting on a 3, and it fails to hit. Now for the 4 bolt guns, hitting on 3s, getting 3 hits. Wounding on 5s, getting 2 wounds. 2 3-up armor saves, and fails 1 of them. And so this Demon Prince is killed off. Next, the last cannon from this Tactical Marine squad is going to attempt to finish off this Bloodthirster. Hitting on a 3, and it hits. Wounding on a 3, and it fails to wound. So then this last cannon will attempt to finish off the Bloodthirster. 1 shot, needs a 5 to hit, and fails with a 4. So now going into the charge phase, this squad of Centurions will declare a charge onto the Skull Cannon. Starting with Overwatch, D6 shots, getting 6 shots. Hitting on 6s, getting 3 hits. Wounding on 3s, getting 2 wounds. 2 4-up armor saves, and they pass both. And so now for charge distance, getting 8 inches. And so all 3 will make it into combat against the Skull Cannon, in base to base. And so we will start with 3 Centurion Assault Launchers, looking for 4-ups, and getting 1. So doing 1 mortal wound onto the Skull Cannon, which will drop it from 2 down to 1 wound left. The Sergeant has 3 attack space, and the regular Centurions have 2 attack space with their siege drills, so 7 attacks total, hitting on 3s. Re-rolling thanks to being within 6 inches of that Chaplain. So getting 4 hits so far, and 3 re-rolls, getting 2 more hits. And wounding on 3s, getting 4 wounds. 4 5-up invulnerable saves, and fails all 4. So that will do 12 damage. And this Skull Cannon is overkilled by a lot. And so now the Centurions will consolidate up to 3 inches. And they will finish their consolidation here. So going into the morale phase, there are no morale checks to take. So, taking a look at the tactical objective cards, the Ultramarines failed to get Big Game Hunter, since that Bloodthirster stayed alive. They did, however, finish off the Demon Prince, which means they do get 1 victory point for Assassinate. And they also failed to complete Defend Objective 6. So at the end of Ultramarines turn 3, the score currently sits at 6 victory points for the Ultramarines and 7 victory points for the Chaos Demons of Khorne. So going into Chaos Demons of Khorne turn 4, the Chaos Demons of Khorne need to start by throwing away the 3 tactical objective cards from the previous turn. So the Chaos Demons of Khorne draw 3 new tactical objective cards, and the first one was Priority Orders Received, which is impossible since Scarbrand's already dead, and the bonus tactical objective that goes with it is Defend Objective 4, which would have been impossible anyways since this is the mission Targets of Opportunity. They also drew Secure Objective 5, score 1 victory point if you control Objective Marker 5 at the end of your turn, and Objective Marker 5 is this one right here next to these Tactical Marines. However, these Tactical Marines are not within 3 inches of the center of that objective marker, so they are technically not controlling it right now. And that is very important because the 3rd tactical objective card that Khorne drew is the Dominion of Chaos. Score D3 victory points if you control more objective markers than your opponent at the end of this turn. And currently, before movement, Khorne is holding 1 objective marker, and the Ultramarines are holding 0. And so technically, Khorne could stand still this turn and still complete that objective card. And so going into the movement phase, this Skull Cannon will remain still. And this Skull Cannon will remain still. And I do need to make a slight correction in what I said because this Bloodthirster is controlling Objective Marker 6 inside of that wall. So technically, Khorne, before any movement happened, was controlling 2 objective markers, whereas the Ultramarines were controlling 0. And so this Bloodthirster is just going to move a couple of inches to be just over an inch away from the Tactical Marine with the last cannon that was sitting in the crater. So, going into the shooting phase, we will start with this Skull Cannon, which is going to fire into this lone Tactical Marine to try to finish it off so that the Bloodthirster doesn't even have to risk taking Overwatch. So, D6 shots, hitting 5 shots, hitting on 3s, getting 4 hits, wounding on 2s, getting 4 wounds. Since the Tactical Marine is sitting in a crater, but the Skull Cannon is -2 AP, he will have a 4-up armor save. And he fails all 4, of course. And so this lone Tactical Marine is crushed. And so then this Skull Cannon is going to attempt to finish off the Storm Raven. D6 shots, getting 6 shots. Hitting on 3s, hitting on 4s, because the Storm Raven is flying. And that makes a huge difference, because instead of getting 4 hits, the Skull Cannon gets 1. Wounding on a 3, and it wounds. 1 5-up armor save, which fails. And the Skull Cannon does D3 damage, and it does 3 damage, and kills the Storm Raven. What a turn of events. Not that it matters because there's no one within 6 inches, but on a 6 it crashes and burns, and it does not. So the fact that the Storm Raven took 3 mortal wounds from its heavy plasma cannon for rolling 3 1s in a single shooting phase caused its death here. And this Storm Raven is removed. And so going into the assault phase, there are no charges to declare, and therefore there is nothing to resolve in the fight phase, and there are no morale tests to take in the morale phase. And so taking a look at the tactical objective cards, they did not complete Priority Orders Received Defend Objective 4, they did not complete Secure Objective 5, but they did complete the Dominion of Chaos, and so that is worth D3 victory points. And here's the roll for that, giving them 2 additional victory points. And so, at the end of Chaos Demons of Khorne turn 4, with very little left on the table from either side, the score currently sits at 9 victory points for the Chaos Demons of Khorne, and 6 victory points for the Ultramarines. So, going into Ultramarines turn 4. The The Ultramarines need to start by throwing away Defend Objective 6 and Big Game Hunter from the previous turn. And so the Ultramarines needed to draw 3 new tactical objective cards, and they started by drawing Area Denial. Score 1 victory point if there are no enemy models within 6 inches of the center of the battlefield at the end of your turn. If there are no enemy models within 12 inches of the center of the battlefield at the end of your turn, score D3 victory points instead. Well, that's a guaranteed D3 victory points because there are no models at all within 12 inches of the center of the board. The second was Priority Orders Received, which of course is worthless since Guilliman's already been killed, and the bonus tactical objective card that goes with that is Honor Your Chapter. That doesn't matter because Guilliman's already killed, so same situation that Khorne had the previous turn. And Supremacy, score D3 victory points if you control any 3 objective markers at the end of your turn. This chaplain is going to move up the board back towards the Ultramarines deployment zone and also towards objective marker 4, 6 inches, and he will also declare an advance. And here's the advance roll, getting 5 additional inches for 11 inches of total movement. And the chaplain, with his 3 wounds left, moved up to here and is now within 3 inches of the center of objective marker 4. This tactical squad will have a couple of the bolt guns reposition in order to hold objective marker 5 right here. And the sergeant here, who is still in the ruin, is within 3 inches of the center of objective marker 5. This squad of tactical marines is going to remain still. This squad of centurions is going to move 4 inches up the board towards objective marker 2 right here, and they will also declare an advance. And here's their advance roll, getting an additional 6 inches for 10 inches of total movement. And they will end up right here. They are within 3 inches of the center of objective marker 2, and they are over an inch away from the skull cannon. And so going into the shooting phase, we will start with the flamers from the Centurions onto the skull cannon. 6d6 shots, getting 27 shots. They automatically hit, so 27 hits. Wounding on 5s, and getting 9 wounds. 9 3-up armor saves. Passes 5 and fails 4. So this will take the skull cannon from 7 starting wounds down to 3 left. So now the last cannon from this tactical marine squad is going to fire into the Bloodthirster with 3 wounds left. 1 shot, hitting on a 3, and it hits. Wounding on a 3, and it fails to wound. And so then this last cannon will also shoot that Bloodthirster because he can see him through the windows of a ruin, and he is within 48-inch range. 1 shot, hitting on a 3, and it hits. 1 hit, wounding on a 3, and it wounds. 1 5-up invulnerable save, which fails. D6 damage, and it does 6 damage. And so this poor Bloodthirster is killed off. There are no charges to declare in the assault phase since this unit advanced this turn, which means there is nothing to resolve in the fight phase, and there are also no morale tests to take in the morale phase. So the Ultramarines, taking a look at the tactical objective cards, they did complete area denial, and there are no Khorne units within 12 inches of the center of the board. So that is worth D3, and it will get them 3 victory points. The Ultramarines obviously did not complete Priority Orders Received, Honor Your Chapter. But thanks to some shuffling around and some advance moves, they did complete Supremacy, which is also worth D3 victory points. And here's the roll for that, and that is also worth 3 victory points. And so, at the end of Ultramarines turn 4, the score currently sits at 12 victory points for the Ultramarines and 9 victory points for the Chaos Demons of Khorne. Going into Chaos Demons of Khorne turn 5, they will start by throwing away Priority Orders Received, Defend Objective 4, and Secure Objective 5 from the previous turn. And so the 3 new tactical objective cards that the Chaos Demons of Khorne drew is Scour the Skies, score 1 victory point if at least 1 enemy unit that can fly was destroyed during this turn. Defend Objective 3, score 2 victory points if you control Objective Marker 3 at the end of 2 consecutive turns. And Secure Objective 3, score 1 victory point if you control Objective Marker 3 at the end of your turn. And Objective Marker 3 is this one right here, currently being held by this Skull Cannon. So going into the movement phase, this Skull Cannon will remain still, and this Skull Cannon will remain still. And so going into the shooting phase, both Skull Cannons, which are within 48-inch range and can see, are going to shoot this squad of Centurions, starting with the Skull Cannon sitting on Objective Marker 3. So D6 shots, hitting 4 shots, hitting on 3s, and only getting 1 hit, wounding on a 3, and getting a wound. one 4-up armor save, which fails, and it will do D3 damage. And it will do 3 damage. And so one Centurion is killed off. And now the Skull Cannon right next to those Centurions will shoot. D6 shots, getting 6 shots, hitting on 3s, and getting 6 hits. Wounding on 3s, getting 6 wounds. 6 4-up armor saves, passes 3 and fails 3. And so these do D3 damage each, but they have to be done separately. So the first shot will do 1 damage, bringing one Centurion down to 2 wounds left. The second strike will do 2 damage, so that will finish off the second regular Centurion. And so finally the third shot will do 3 damage, which is just enough to kill off these 2 Centurions. And so going into the assault phase, there is no one within 12 inches to charge, and therefore there's nothing in the fight phase to resolve, and there are no morale checks to take. So that is the end of the Khorne turn. So taking a look at the tactical objective cards, Khorne failed to scour the skies, they failed to defend Objective 3, however they did secure Objective 3, which is worth 1 victory point. And so at the end of Chaos Demons of Khorne turn 5, now with even less on the board, the score currently sits at 10 victory points for the Chaos Demons of Khorne and 12 victory points for the Ultramarines. So now, going into Ultramarines turn 5, possibly the last turn of the game, the Ultramarines need to start by throwing away priority orders received, bonus tactical objective honor your chapter from the previous turn. So the 3 new tactical objective cards that the Ultramarines drew are Psychological Warfare, score 1 victory point if your opponent failed a morale test during your turn. If your opponent failed 3 or more morale tests, score D3 victory points instead, which is impossible. Behind Enemy Lines, score 1 victory point if you have at least 1 unit completely within the enemy's deployment zone at the end of your turn. If you have at least 3 units within your opponent's deployment zone at the end of your turn, score D3 victory points instead. And for the Emperor, score 1 victory point if 1 or more of your infantry or biker units made a successful charge during this turn, which, considering how far away everything is from each other, that will also be impossible. Going into the movement phase, this tactical Marine squad will remain still. And also this tactical Marine squad will remain still. This chaplain is going to move 6 inches into the Chaos Demons of Khorne deployment zone, and it will also declare an advance. And here's the advance roll, getting an additional 4 inches for 10 inches of total movement. And so after its 10 inches of total movement, it did not move the full 10, but it ended up here inside this wall of this ruin, and so it is now fully within the Chaos Demons of Khorne deployment zone, but it is also completely hidden and unseeable from this skull cannon with 3 wounds left. So going into the shooting phase of Ultramarines turn 5, the last cannons from those 2 tactical Marine squads across the board here, the only target that they can see, and that's in range, is this skull cannon with 5 wounds left sitting on objective marker 3, and so both will shoot at it, one at a time. And so starting with the last cannon that is in the ruin of the old stone medieval looking building, not the Imperial building, hitting on 3, which fails to hit. And so now the last cannon from the Imperial building also fails to hit. Fantastic. And so that's the end of the shooting phase, and there's nothing within charge range, so nothing to do in the assault phase, no fights to resolve in the fight phase, and no morale tests to take in the morale phase. And so, the Ultramarines failed to complete Psychological Warfare. However, they do get 1 victory point for behind enemy lines thanks to the Chaplain, but they failed for the Emperor. And so now at the end of Ultramarines turn 5, the score currently sits at 13 victory points for the Ultramarines and 10 victory points for the Chaos Demons of Khorne. This, of course, means we need to roll a dice, and on a 1 or 2, the game ends. On a 3-up, the game continues. And so here's the dice roll, and we get a 5, so the game will continue. So so going into Chaos Demons of Khorne turn 6, the Chaos Demons of Khorne need to throw away Scour the Skies and defend Objective 3 from the previous turn. And so they draw 3 new tactical objective cards, and they draw Blood and Guts, score 1 victory point if 1 enemy unit was destroyed during the fight phase of this turn. If 3 or more enemy units were destroyed during the fight phase of this turn, score D3 victory points instead. Secure Objective 6, score 1 victory point if you control Objective Marker 6 at the end of your turn. And the Great Game. Roll a dice at the end of each of your turns after generating this objective. Score that number of victory points if you control exactly that number of objectives markers. For example, if you roll a 3, you will score 3 victory points if you control 3 objective markers. And objective marker 6 is this one right here inside of this ruin, with no one from either side anywhere near it. And so going into the movement phase, this skull cannon will remain still. This skull cannon is going to move 6 inches up the board towards objective marker 2 in order to hold it, also because he currently has no targets. And it will finish its movement right here, although he still has no targets that are in line of sight. And so going into the shooting phase, in an attempt to deny line breaker potentially, this skull cannon is going to shoot this chaplain hiding inside the ruin. So D6 shots, hitting 4 shots. Hitting on 3s, getting 3 hits. Wounding on 2s, getting 2 wounds. 2 4-up invulnerable saves, and passes both. And once again, there is nothing to do in the assault, fight, or morale phase. And so, Chaos Demons of Khorne did not complete Blood and Guts, they did not secure Objective 6, but we do have to roll a dice to see if they completed the Great Game. And Khorne is holding 2 objective markers, so they are looking for 2, and they failed to get it. And so at the end of Chaos Demons of Khorne, turn 6, the score still sits at 10 victory points for the Chaos Demons of Khorne and 13 victory points for the Ultramarines. And so now going into Ultramarines turn 6, the Ultramarines need to start by throwing away For the Emperor and Psychological Warfare from the previous turn. And so the Ultramarines draw 3 new tactical objective cards, and they draw Defend Objective 4, score 2 victory points if you control Objective Marker 4 at the end of 2 consecutive turns. Domination, score D3 plus 3 victory points if you control every objective marker on the battlefield at the end of your turn. And Secure Objective 4, score 1 victory point if you control Objective Marker 4 at the end of your turn. And Objective Marker 4 is this one right here, fairly close by to the Chaplain. And so going into the movement phase, the Chaplain is going to move 6 inches over this direction towards the objective marker, and now the Chaplain is within 3 inches of the center of Objective Marker 4. Both of the tactical Marine squads are going to sit still again, and once again in the shooting phase, they will both shoot the Skull Cannon on Objective Marker 3 with 5 wounds left, going one at a time, starting with the last cannon in the Imperial building. So, hitting on a 3, and it hits. Wounding on a 3, fails to wound. The last cannon in the medieval style building hits on a 3, and wounds on a 3. Fails to wound. However, this Chaplain is now able to see in within 24 inches of this skull cannon, and since he did not advance, he can fire a single bolt gun shot into it. Hitting on a 3, and it hits. Wounding on a 5, fails to wound. And once again, nothing to do in the assault, fight, or morale phase. So taking a look at the tactical objective cards, the Ultramarines failed to defend Objective 4, they failed Domination, but they did complete Secure Objective 4 for 1 victory point. And so now at the end of Ultramarines turn 6, the score currently sits at 14 victory points for the Ultramarines and 10 victory points for the Chaos Demons of Khorne. And now we will roll to see if the game ends again. This time on a 1, 2, or 3, the game ends. On a 4 up, the game continues. And the game is over. And so, after 6 turns, the game is finally over. And so the final score is 10 victory points for the Chaos Demons of Khorne and 14 victory points for the Ultramarines. And that Chaplain is not holding Linebreaker as he's just outside of the deployment zone for the Chaos Demons of Khorne. But this does mean that the Ultramarines are the victors of this game with a major victory. And for once in a very long time, actually, from the game ending on a dice roll and not from a concession. So we have an Ultramarines victory, 14 victory points to 10. And so now that the game is over, and it's been announced that the Ultramarines are the victors, 14 victory points to 10. I can go over one or two of my final thoughts on the game, and I will try to keep this short. First and foremost, it really helped the Chaos Demons of Khorne that they stole the initiative. I mean, that really changed the tone of the game compared to the previous game for sure. Not allowing the Ultramarines to have a free turn to do whatever they want and move wherever they want and shoot whatever they want. I mean, really helped Khorne out. Of course, the problem for the Chaos Demons of Khorne was they managed to steal the initiative, but then they didn't make any charges. Well, they made one with Scarbrand, but the squad of Bloodletters, which had 2 chances to make it in, and both Bloodthirsters failed their charges, which is just ridiculous when you think about it. The fact that there were 6 attempts, and really 7 attempts to charge total, counting Scarbrand's, and they only made 1 out of 7 9-inch charges. Like, that's crazy to think about. And that really hurt because, of course, the only unit that Scarbrand made it into combat with was Guilliman. Now, to be fair, he just barely killed off Guilliman, but he did kill off Guilliman, and that was a huge deal. And that's the other point that I need to bring up within my final thoughts, is the fact that Guilliman was killed off right away made a huge difference in the way that this Ultramarines army was able to play this turn. Not having the reroll to hits and the reroll to wounds, that was a huge detriment to the Ultramarines, and compared to the last game, it really showed. And it really gave Khorne a fighting chance. And the victory points kept going back and forth. What really sort of sealed the victory for the Ultramarines in this game was the fact that in one of the turns, I think it might have been turn 4, the turns sort of run together for me, unfortunately, but the fact that they completed 2 tactical objective cards, both were worth D3 victory points, and they rolled 3 victory points for each. So all of a sudden, in one turn, they went from 6 victory points to 12. And at that point, Khorne had 9 victory points. So the Ultramarines in a single player turn went from losing by 3 victory points to winning by 3 victory points. And then they never lost the lead after that. They slowly gained a couple of extra victory points to bring them up to 14, and Khorne gained 1 victory point to bring them up to 10. But that was sort of the problem, was that then the rest of the game, Khorne was down by at least 3 victory points, and they never came back from that. And so that really hurt Khorne and really helped Ultramarines closer to the end of the game, was that all of a sudden they had 2 lucky tactical objective cards, which were completable, and then also were really lucky with the D3 victory point rolls. Because if we think about it here, they won 14 victory points to 10, and they gained 6 victory points in that one turn. Let's say, for instance, they had only rolled 1 victory point from the D3 for each of them. We'd be tied right now and have a draw if those had only been 1s instead of 3s. And if that had happened, where the score ended up being 10 victory points to 10, for one thing, that makes the fact that the Ultramarines are just barely outside of Linebreaker, that makes that a huge difference if we're talking about it being only 10 victory points to 10. Then the fact that they didn't get Linebreaker actually would have really messed them up. But what that also means, if it was a draw, Khorne technically would have won a minor victory because they only have 96 power and the Ultramarines have 97 power total. So technically, Khorne actually would have won a minor victory. But it's not like that was the only 2 tactical objective cards this game that had a roll for D3 victory points. Khorne also had a couple of those, and one of theirs they managed to get 3, another one they got 2. The Ultramarines had another tactical objective card that they got 2 victory points for. And so it's not like it was only those 2 tactical objective cards that caused the win for the Ultramarines. It's just interesting how that particular moment, those 2 tactical objective cards really swayed and switched the tide and helped to secure a victory for the Ultramarines. The other defining moment in this game that hurt the Ultramarines significantly was, well, 2 moments. First of which was the fact that the one Stormraven at the end caused 3 mortal wounds on itself from its twin heavy plasma, and then of course the Skull Cannon in the next shooting phase did exactly 3 damage. Got 1 shot through, did D3 damage, and it of course rolled for 3 damage. And so of course the Stormraven essentially killed itself there, because
had it only caused 2 mortal wounds, or 1 mortal wound, or no mortal wounds to itself, it would still be alive. And is debating back and forth whether to use standard shots or supercharged shots, decided to use supercharged shots to try to do wounds to the skull cannon, to do more wounds, because obviously it's wounding on 3s instead of 4s, and then it does 2 damage apiece instead of 1. But of course, only 1 wound goes through and does 2 damage, and then the skull cannon never took any more damage the rest of the game because the last cannons on the tactical marines decided to not do anything for 2 or 3 turns, which was great. But the fact that that Storm Raven killed itself and wasn't there to help out later, obviously if that Storm Raven had a whole nother turn of shooting, that skull cannon most likely would have been dead because the Storm Raven would have been able to focus everything on it. And then, of course, we're talking about Khorne being much, much closer to being tabled. Going along with that, the other issue for the Ultramarines this game at the end, which really went in Khorne's favor, which is why we had to go through turn 5 and 6 fully and not just declare a concession or anything like that, was because, of course, the 2 skull cannons managed to perfectly kill off that squad of Centurions. They did exactly what they needed to kill them off. 1 damage less, the Centurions would still be here, and one of them would have been able to charge. I'm sure possibly only one would have been left, but he would have been able to charge the skull cannon that's now down to 3 wounds and probably kill it off in close combat, which would make a difference. Once again, also talking about being that much closer to tabling. And had the Storm Raven stayed alive and not killed itself, there's a very good chance that those Centurions would not have been killed in the next Khorne turn. I think it was the next Khorne turn that those Centurions were killed off. And so it was sort of a domino effect where since the Storm Raven was killed off, it allowed the skull cannons to focus purely on the Centurions, which managed to perfectly kill the Centurions off. And of course, because of that, we went through 6 turns instead of having a tabling, which I thought was going to happen after seeing Khorne be reduced to 2 skull cannons and a Bloodthirster. Although to be fair, that Bloodthirster survived at least 1 turn more than it really should have. Possibly 2 turns. It probably survived at least 2 turns more than it really should have, with only 3 wounds left. But I've rambled enough. So, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this battle report. I apologize if it got a little tedious at the end, but that's what happens when both sides have almost no models left on the table and very little power to do anything from those models. So, I hope you enjoyed, and stay tuned for the next one. And I do apologize, but I thought I had finished everything that I needed to say, but after I went and started to edit the video, I realized that I have to take away 1 victory point from the Ultramarines because they should not have completed Hold the Line. Because it specifically states within the tactical objective card, this objective cannot be achieved on your first turn. Which means that that tactical objective card should not have been completed and should have actually been thrown away. And so I do apologize for that. It does not change the outcome of the game, but it does mean that the Ultramarines only win with 13 victory points versus the 10 from the Chaos Demons of Khorne, rather than 14 to 10. And so they only win by a margin of 3 instead of 4, which of course then, throughout the game, made a couple of very lucky dice rolls on the Ultramarine side that much more important that they got, because they only won by 3, not by 4. So like I said, they should not have gotten Hold the Line, and so I do apologize about that. I'm sure anyone watching was screaming at the computer throughout the entire game as after every single player turn. After Ultramarines turn 1, I was saying that the Ultramarines had 1 more victory point than they actually did. So, final score is really 13 victory points for the Ultramarines and 10 victory points for the Chaos Demons of Khorne.